Every night,
It's okay.
after the long road home, a
here
man
to help
finds
you.
a survivor waiting. Not a dog by the door, but a bobcat he pulled
She read
from
a soothing
fire and
drawing.
fear. She stands tall, paws lifted, claws asleep, asking for
It's
what
okay.
saved them both.
You're safe now.
A careful hug. This is their quiet ritual trust given back, one breath at a time. It isn't a trick, it isn't a show. It's a promise kept in small moments, repeated with grace, as dusk turns to comfort and a wild heart learns to stay. Smoke rolled through the Bitterroot Mountains like dark ocean waves, swallowing pine ridges and turning the sky the color of rust. Eli Ward steadied his camera, recording the desperate flight of deer through the glow of burning trees. Then under the roar of the fire, he caught something softer, a single cry that didn't belong to the wind. He lowered the camera and listened again. It came in short, broken pulses, high, thin, and trembling. No human voice could sound like that. He moved toward the sound, boots sinking in ash, eyes watering. The closer he came, the more it resembled the whimper of a frightened child, though he knew it wasn't human at all. Through the shifting smoke, he saw movement beneath a fallen cedar. A small bobcat, her fur singed and patchy, struggled to pull free from the scorched roots. Her flank rose and fell unevenly, sides quivering with each breath. For an instant, she froze, golden eyes catching his silhouette like two sparks in the haze. Eli dropped to one knee. The heat pressed against his face as he extended his gloved hand. The bobcat hissed weakly, a sound more plea than threat. Her hind paw was twisted in melted wire, remnants of an old snare. The metal was so hot it smoked. He cut it loose with his knife, murmuring low, meaningless words to calm her panic. When he lifted her, she was shockingly light, barely more than bones wrapped in smoke-scented fur. One paw pressed feebly against his chest, then fell limp. Ash clung to her whiskers like frost. Behind them, flames snapped through the underbrush, pushing him toward the trail. He pulled his jacket around her and started down the mountain. The wind howled through the canyons, scattering embers across the snow-dusted ground. Each gust made her body tremble against his heart. He whispered, "Hold on, little one," though he wasn't sure she could hear. By the time he reached the truck, her breathing was shallow but steady, an uneven rhythm that matched the rumble of the engine. At the edge of the forest, the ranger checkpoint was empty. Everyone had been called to fight the blaze. Eli paused, knowing he should call it in, wait for wildlife rescue. But the temperature was dropping fast, and the nearest shelter was hours away. He made his choice, turned the wheel toward his cabin, and pressed the accelerator through the falling ash. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of pine tar and coffee gone cold. He laid the bobcat on a wool blanket near the stove. Under the flicker of lamplight, the wounds looked worse. Burns along her paw pads, a cut near the ear, fur singed down to skin. When he touched her side, her ribs moved, weak but alive. He exhaled for the first time in hours. He filled a bowl with water and set it near her muzzle. She didn't drink, only blinked slowly, as if weighing whether this new creature before her meant danger. Her pupils were round, unguarded. He spoke softly, describing the rain that would come after the fire, the snow that would cover the hills, nonsense words that carried warmth instead of meaning. Through the night, he sat beside her, every twitch of her tail pulling him from the edge of sleep. Once she lifted her head and pressed her nose to the edge of his jacket, inhaling the salt of his sweat. For a heartbeat, they were still two survivors, measuring the quiet after chaos. Just before dawn, she stirred, eyes glinting like embers. Eli opened the door so the cold air could wash through the cabin. The smell of smoke drifted out into the pale morning. Outside, the forest hissed with melting ice and distant sirens. He realized he had no idea what to feed a bobcat or what to do next, but he knew he couldn't let her die. When the first snow began to fall, she shifted closer to the stove, curling her body tight. Eli watched the faint rise of her breath, that fragile rhythm that tethered her to life. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the sound. "You made it through the fire. Maybe we both did." The words hung between them like a promise neither could understand. By sunrise, the blaze had moved north, leaving only smoke ghosts drifting across the valley. Inside the cabin, the bobcat slept, one paw twitching against the blanket. Eli sat with the camera in his lap, but didn't raise it. Some moments, he thought, weren't meant to be captured, only kept, and in that silence, the wild heart beside him began to dream again. Morning light filtered through smoke-stained windows, settling over the blanket where the bobcat lay. Her breathing was shallow, steady but fragile, each rise and fall a quiet battle. Eli crouched near the stove, watching the small chest move. He hadn't slept, afraid the silence would mean she was gone. He phoned the only person he trusted, Dr. Laura Quinn, the town's veterinarian. When she arrived, her boots left melted snow across the floor. She froze when she saw the animal, eyes narrowing behind fogged glasses. "You brought a wild bobcat into your house," she said, equal parts disbelief and concern. "She was burning alive," Eli answered, voice hoarse. "I couldn't leave her." Laura knelt beside the creature, her hands practiced and gentle. She cleaned the burns, checked the pulse, and injected antibiotics. "She's lucky," she murmured. "If she makes it through the night, she might actually live." When Laura left, the cabin felt heavier, quieter. The fire cracked softly, casting amber shadows on Aurora's face. Eli didn't know her name yet, but something about her presence felt ancient, regal, unbroken. Even wounded, she carried the stillness of a queen trapped inside a soldier's body. Outside, snow fell without sound. Inside, Eli tried to eat but couldn't. The bobcat's eyes opened briefly, gold meeting grey. She didn't hiss this time. Instead, her gaze held his for a long moment, steady and unreadable. Like the wild itself had paused to measure the man before it. He whispered, "You're safe here," though safety was only half true. The cabin was old, drafty, full of ghostlight and memories of his wife's laughter that still lived in the walls. The bobcat shifted slightly, as if sensing grief in the air. Her claws flexed once, then relaxed. That night, the wind howled through the chimney. The bobcat trembled, dreaming, her paws twitching against the blanket. Eli moved closer, laying another log on the fire. The warmth spread slowly across the room, brushing her fur with a golden glow. For the first time, she didn't pull away from it. Days blurred together. Eli kept a quiet distance, leaving food near her paws, bits of cooked meat, water in a shallow bowl. She ignored it for hours before eating, each bite slow, suspicious. Every sound startled her. Every creak of wood sent her eyes darting toward escape routes that didn't exist. When she could finally stand, she limped toward the door, pressed her nose against the crack, and breathed the cold. Eli opened it just enough for light to spill inside. She didn't run, she just stared at the trees swaying in the distance, her reflection trembling in the frost. At dusk, Laura returned for a checkup. Her burns are healing, she said, touching the bandaged paw. But she's still terrified. She's remembering the fire. Eli nodded. He understood too well what it meant to remember something you couldn't escape. Pain wasn't just memory, it was a place. That evening, when the world went blue with twilight, Eli heard a low, broken sound, a growl or a sob. He couldn't tell. The bobcat sat near the door, staring at the shadows where her young might have been. Her throat moved, a small sound escaping, filled with loss, older than words. Eli wanted to reach for her, but didn't. He simply sat down across the room, silent company in her grief. The wind pushed snow against the windows, and the cabin groaned under its weight. Two living things remained inside, both wounded, both learning to breathe again after the fire. When the night deepened, the bobcat finally lay down, curling into herself. The air had grown colder, but Eli didn't move to add wood to the fire. He knew she was listening to every sound, testing the distance between fear and trust. Somewhere beyond the storm, a bond had begun, quiet as snow, fragile as breath, but alive. Morning light spilled across the cabin floor, warming the fur of the sleeping bobcat. Her burns had begun to close, though patches of skin still showed through. Each breath came slow and even. When Eli stirred, the sound of his boots made her ears flick, but she didn't rise. The air between them had softened. He left the door open for fresh air and placed a bowl of water near the hearth. Aurora watched him through half-closed eyes, her tail twitching once, twice. When he stepped back, she leaned forward and drank. It was the first time she'd done it while he was still in the room. Eli froze, afraid even his heartbeat might break the moment. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the roof in rhythmic taps. Eli spoke quietly, telling her stories no one else could hear about the storms he chased, the photographs that never developed, the loneliness that followed him home. Aurora didn't understand the words, but she understood tone. His voice carried no threat. Later that afternoon, she limped toward the small window, drawn by the call of magpies. Sunlight caught the gold in her eyes, and for a brief second, she looked whole again. Eli watched from across the room, realizing he had stopped thinking of her as it. She had become her, the survivor, the queen of this broken place. That night, she startled at the crack of a branch outside. Her claws scraped the floor, body tense, ready to fight or flee. Eli raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Easy," he said, the same way he might calm a frightened horse. The tone worked. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped. She turned her head away, but didn't retreat. Days stretched longer as spring whispered at the edges of the mountains. Eli started building a small pen outside the cabin, a safe space surrounded by wire, big enough for her to move freely. Aurora watched through the window, her expression unreadable. She didn't yet know the meaning of freedom. When he carried her out for the first time, wrapped in a thick blanket, she tensed like coiled steel. The moment her paws touched earth, she froze, eyes darting between forest and man. Then something inside her shifted. The wind carried scents she remembered. Pine, wet soil, the memory of the life she'd lost. She took one cautious step. Eli sat nearby, pretending to fix the latch so she wouldn't feel observed. Aurora prowled slowly, testing the ground, sniffing the cold air. Her muscles moved beneath the scarred fur, lean and beautiful. Every few seconds, she glanced back toward him, unsure why he remained so still. He never looked away. By dusk, fatigue pulled at her limbs. She returned to the spot near the fence where he'd laid a blanket. When Eli rose to go inside, she let out a low, rasping sound. Not a growl, not a warning. It was almost a call. He stopped, turned, and saw her eyes following him. He smiled. "You're getting there," he whispered. That evening, thunder rolled far off across the valley. Aurora lay near the doorway, close enough to feel the warmth leaking from the stove. Her body no longer shook at every noise. She closed her eyes, trusting the night to pass. Outside, rain began to fall softly, washing the ash from the pines. When dawn broke, she was still there, closer to him than ever before, one paw resting over the edge of his jacket. The gesture wasn't planned. It was instinct, pure and wordless. Eli woke to find her watching him with steady calm. For the first time since the fire, there was no fear in her gaze. He reached out slowly, letting his fingers brush the air near her shoulder but not touch. Aurora didn't flinch. The space between wild and human had narrowed to a breath. In that fragile quiet, something sacred took root. A small, invisible bridge made of trust, and once it formed, neither of them would ever be the same. The last snow of spring melted into thin streams that carved paths down the hillside. Aurora moved more easily now, the limp barely visible. Her fur had grown thick again, streaked with soft grey where fire once burned it away. Every day she paced the edge of the outdoor pen Eli built, testing the wire, staring at the forest beyond. Eli repaired his old camera gear near the porch, pretending not to notice how often she watched him. He spoke to her sometimes, not expecting answers, just sharing the silence. She listened in her own way, ears twitching, tail swaying to his voice. Trust had become their language, wordless but fluent. By late afternoon, she began to recognize the rhythm of his days, the sound of his truck climbing the dirt road, the crunch of boots on gravel, the click of the gate. She waited for those sounds now. When they came, she would rise on her hind legs and stretch toward him, a strange greeting that belonged only to them. Eli laughed the first time she did it. "That your hello?" he said softly, standing a few feet away. She blinked, tilted her head, then padded forward, pressing her forehead against the fence. It wasn't a hug yet, but it was close. The warmth of the moment filled the yard more surely than the setting sun. Each evening the routine repeated itself. Eli returning from the forest, Aurora waiting near the gate. Sometimes she let out a short trill, a bobcat's version of a purr. Sometimes she simply stood still, eyes half closed, as if soaking in the comfort of seeing him again. What began as accident was becoming ritual. The forest around them came alive with spring. Magpies called from high branches, deer crossed the ridgeline at dawn, and the air smelled of thawing pine. Aurora watched it all, but made no attempt to escape. Freedom was only a few feet away, yet she always turned back to the man who had pulled her from the fire. At dusk, Eli often sat by the fence, sketching ideas for a new enclosure. Aurora would lie near him on the other side, tails occasionally brushing through the gaps. When he shifted or sighed, she raised her head, alert but calm. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was alive with unspoken recognition. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in suddenly, shaking the trees. Lightning flashed, and thunder cracked through the valley. Aurora bolted to the corner of her pen, fur bristling, eyes wide with old terror. Eli ran out into the rain, his coat soaked instantly. "It's okay," he called, kneeling by the fence. His voice cut through the storm like a steady drum. She hesitated, then crept toward him, drawn by that familiar tone. When she reached the wire, she pressed her forehead against it again, closing her eyes. Rain streaked her fur, lightning painting her silver. Eli rested his hand close enough for her to smell the warmth beneath the metal. The fear faded, replaced by something gentler recognition. After that night, something in her changed. Each evening, no matter the weather, she took her place by the gate before the sun slipped behind the hills. She didn't cry or pace anymore. She waited, patient and still, until the sound of his return filled the valley. Waiting had become its own kind of devotion. Eli began to notice it too, the timing, the certainty. "Every night," he whispered one evening, watching her silhouette framed in gold. "You wait for me." Aurora tilted her head, as if understanding. In the fading light, she stood taller, balanced on her hind legs. Front paws lifted in that familiar, reaching gesture. It was no longer a question or a plea. It was habit, instinct, and affection wrapped into one motion. When Eli stepped closer, she lowered her paws gently onto his shoulders through the fence. The claws never extended, the wild in her remained, but it had learned to meet love without harm. And as the first stars appeared above the ridge, the man and the bobcat stood together in a silence that no language could touch. Summer arrived early that year, painting the Bitterroot Valley golden green. Aurora's coat shimmered in the sun, full and healthy, each movement smooth and silent. She'd claimed every inch of the enclosure, like a small kingdom, her favourite perch, her shaded corner, her place by the gate where she waited each evening for Eli's return. The routine that once felt like recovery had become rhythm. When the truck's engine echoed down the gravel road, she rose on her hind legs, paws lifted, tail swaying. Eli always met her with a soft laugh, a few quiet words, sometimes a hand pressed against the fence. It was enough. For her, it was home. One evening, as Eli brushed dust from his sleeves, a figure appeared at the end of the path. James O'Neill, his neighbour, leaned on the fence with a camera slung around his neck. "Heard you've got yourself a wild roommate," he said with a grin. Aurora froze, eyes narrowing, ears tilting back. Strangers carried different energy. Eli waved him off gently. "Keep your distance. She's still wild." But curiosity had already lit James's face. He raised the lens, snapping one quick photo before Eli could stop him. The shutter's click startled Aurora. She hissed, claws flashing against the fence, tail puffed in alarm. The air crackled with her fear. That night, the incident replayed in Eli's mind. He sat by the fire while Aurora paced restlessly in her pen. Every few minutes, she looked toward the tree line, expecting more intruders. He whispered through the mesh, "It's okay. He's gone." She blinked slowly, but her tail kept twitching, distrust returning like an old wound. 2 days later, a small article appeared in the local paper. "The Bobcat Who Waits for a Hug." James had posted the photo online, and it spread faster than wildfire. Calls began coming to Eli's cabin. Reporters, tourists, people wanting to see the hugging cat. He didn't answer any of them, but word had already escaped into the world. When Deputy Frank Dawson showed up in uniform, the forest went silent. Aurora watched from the shadows, golden eyes fixed on the stranger's movements. Frank's boots crunched across the dirt as he studied the enclosure. "You realize," he said, "keeping a wild bobcat, this tame isn't exactly by the book." Eli's voice stayed calm. "She's not a pet. She's recovering." Frank looked at the cat, then at him. "Recovery's one thing. but she trusts you more than her own kind. That's dangerous. Behind them, Aurora shifted closer to the fence, her gaze locked on Eli. She didn't growl. She just waited, as if his presence alone defined safety. After Frank left, Aurora stayed tense. She refused to eat that evening, circling the pen instead. Eli sat nearby until the moon rose, humming softly the way he did when words failed. Slowly, her pacing stopped. She lay down near the fence, her eyes softening again. The world had come knocking. But for now, it hadn't broken through. The next morning, Dr. Laura arrived unannounced. "You've started something rare, Eli," she said, watching Aurora stretch under the sun. "But people will come. Curiosity isn't kind to wild things." Aurora flicked her ears, picking up her tone if not her words. The bobcat moved closer, resting one paw lightly against the fence beside Eli's hand. By sunset, the valley glowed copper and quiet again. Aurora's silhouette waited at her usual spot, tall and still. When Eli walked down the path, she rose to greet him as always. Front paws lifted, head tilted in her strange, beautiful way. Whatever storms the world was preparing, she met them with the calm of a creature who knew her place. Eli whispered through the dusk, "You don't know what they'll say, do you?" She blinked slowly, tail brushing the dirt. To her, nothing had changed. The camera clicks, the voices, the warnings, they belonged to another world. For Aurora, there was only the sound of his boots and the promise that every night he would come home. The headlines had stopped being funny. Reporters kept calling. Drones hovered above the tree line, and strangers left notes at the gate asking for tours. Aurora no longer waited in peace. Every sound made her ears twitch, her body tense. The quiet rhythm she'd built with Eli was breaking under the weight of attention. Eli started covering the pen with heavy canvas to block the view. Aurora didn't understand why the light disappeared, why his voice sounded strained. She could smell his frustration, taste the tension in the air. When he spoke to her now, it was softer, almost apologetic, as if he owed her an explanation for a world she didn't choose. One morning, the sound of an engine stopped at the foot of the hill. Aurora crouched low, watching as a dark truck pulled into view. Deputy Frank Dawson stepped out, hat tilted, clipboard in hand. Behind him, Dr. Laura followed quietly, eyes full of worry. Aurora recognized neither, but she felt Eli's heartbeat change. Frank stood at the fence, his tone calm but firm. "Mr. Ward, this can't go on. You know the regulations. She's too humanized." Eli crossed his arms. "She's alive because of that. You'd rather she'd died in the fire?" Laura sighed softly. "He's right, Eli. The department's already given notice. You have 90 days to relocate her." Aurora watched them argue through the mesh, her tail curling tight. The words meant nothing to her, but the tones did, sharp, heavy, filled with something final. When they left, she pressed against the fence where Eli's hand had been moments before, searching for warmth that lingered only in scent. That evening, Eli sat outside long after dark, staring at the mountains. The fire crackled behind him, throwing flickers of orange across the pen. Aurora approached the fence, silent as shadow, and rubbed her head against the post near his shoulder. He reached up without thinking, his fingers brushing her fur. "I promised you safety," he whispered. "I just didn't know what it would cost." Days slipped by with quiet desperation. Eli made calls to sanctuaries across the state, but none could take her. Too old, too bonded, Too wild, they said. Each rejection built another wall around his hope. Aurora watched him pace, restless, feeling his unease ripple through her like thunder before a storm. When Marisol Vega arrived, a woman from the State Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Aurora sensed her authority before the words began. Marisol's movements were measured, confident, respectful. She stood near the fence and studied the bobcat for a long time. "She's extraordinary," she said softly. "But she's no longer fit for the wild. We can give her space, safety, and purpose, but not freedom." Eli hesitated. "She's not a display. She's a life." Marisol nodded. "Then let's give her one that lasts." Aurora tilted her head, catching his voice trembling through the wire. The emotion inside him smelled different tonight, fear wrapped in tenderness. She stayed still, eyes locked on his, waiting for the decision he couldn't make. That night, the sky broke open with rain. Eli stood barefoot in the mud, staring at the gate while Aurora waited on the other side. She didn't flinch at the lightning or thunder. She had weathered worse. He finally knelt, the fence between them like a confession. "Whatever happens, you'll be okay," he said. His voice cracked on the word okay. In the following days, he began building a crate lined with cedar shavings and soft cloth. Aurora inspected it cautiously, sniffing each corner, sensing change. Eli pretended it was nothing, but she could tell the rhythm of his routine was gone, replaced by silence heavy with goodbye. Her waiting by the gate became slower, hesitant, as if she, too, understood the shape of farewell. When the last morning of the deadline came, mist covered the valley like smoke reborn. Aurora waited at the fence, standing tall as always. Paws spread in that familiar pose. Eli approached slowly, rain dripping from his hair. Their eyes met through the mesh, and for one suspended heartbeat, there were no laws, no cages, only recognition. A man and a bobcat, both bound by a promise neither could keep. Dawn thinned the fog into ribbons across the valley as the crate waited by the porch, lined with cedar and clean cloth. Aurora circled it once, nose low, reading a map of scents that told of roads and strangers. Eli's hands were steady, but his breath betrayed him, shallow and careful, like trying not to wake a dream. He opened the pen with the quiet ritual they'd learned together. Aurora stepped out, soft pawed on damp earth, pausing where his boots had left dark ovals in the mud. The forest breathed cold behind the fence. She glanced toward it, then back to him, caught between an old world and a voice she trusted. A tarp flapped on the truck bed, the sound crisp as a wing beat. She flinched, then stilled, ears angling for threat. Eli knelt to her level, speaking low and even, the rhythm that bridged their distance. The wind carried cedar, rain, and his fear. She blinked once, slow, and the air between them settled. When he lifted the crate lid, she leaned in, reading the shadows. No blood, no wire, no smoke, just the clean weight of wood and cloth. He waited. The silence stretched, not a standoff, but a conversation without language. Then Aurora placed one paw inside. Muscles coiled, and climbed in as if choosing the road herself. The hinges clicked. Eli secured the latch with fingers that remembered fire and rescue. Aurora crouched, calm but alert, eyes steady through the slats. The truck door shut with a muted thud. She tracked the sound, tail tip twitching once, then went still. A queen travelling not in chains, but in stubborn dignity. Gravel lifted under the tires, a low growl that hummed through the floor. Trees slid by like columns of smoke returned to wood. Aurora adjusted her weight, finding a center the road could not shake. Each curve laid another layer of distance on the scent of home. Yet her pulse stayed level, rain-cool and measured. They stopped once at the overlook where the fire had once raged. The valley was green again, stitched with new growth, scars softened by time. Eli opened the tailgate and crouched by the crate. Aurora leaned close to the slats, drawing in his scent. He said nothing. Some griefs were cleaner without words. Back on the road, thunder rolled far to the east, a quiet drumbeat under cloud. Aurora tasted the change before she saw it. Disinfectant, clean straw, the faint chorus of animals speaking in low, private notes. The sign flashed by wildlife rehabilitation letters bright against the grey afternoon. Marisol Vega met them at the gate, rain flecking her jacket. She approached without hurry, eyes level with Aurora's. No smile, no reaching fingers, only respect. The crate lowered to a wheeled dolly, the motion smooth and certain. Aurora stayed crouched, reading this new woman the way she read weather. Inside, the corridor breathed warmth. Aurora smelled fox, owl, porcupine, stories layered in dust and steel. When Eli unlatched the door, she stepped out, spine long and fluid, claiming space with each careful footfall. The room did not rattle her. What shook was the silence, and the man who carried it. They walked her to a large enclosure of bark and stone, high logs stitched with rope. The gate swung wide on greased hinges. Aurora paused, then crossed the threshold, mapping corners, water, shelter. She stood tall at the far end and turned, eyes catching Eli's through the mesh, the distance exact and unkind. Eli raised his hand to the wire, not touching it, only resting his palm near where her head might come. She came forward, slow as evening, and lifted on her hind legs the familiar shape of waiting. The mesh held them apart. She pressed her forehead to the diamonds of steel. He bowed his own to the same cold pattern. Rain softened to mist. Marisol stepped back, granting them the space animals need. Aurora's claws stayed sheathed, her weight set gentle against the fence. Eli exhaled a tremor that finally had somewhere to land. In that shared, soundless minute, the promise changed shape, not keeping, but keeping faith. Dawn found Aurora awake before the keepers, pacing the perimeter of her new enclosure with soft, soundless steps. The place smelled of bark, iron, and distant animals. A layered script of lives she did not know. She tested each post with her whiskers, mapping the boundaries the way water learns a riverbed. She climbed the highest log to see the yard spill into trees beyond the fence. Wind combed her fur, bringing news of elk, damp soil, and a road humming far away. The forest was close enough to salt the air, yet always a step outside her reach. She settled, listening for what came next. Keepers worked without chatter. Marisol's gait was even, promises kept in motion rather than voice. A rubber ball, a burlap scent bag, a block of frozen meat offerings of routine. Aurora studied each, then accepted them in order, not for entertainment, but to understand the hands that brought them. By mid-morning she knew the center's heartbeat. Kennel doors, mop water, the clink of buckets, an owl sighing like a winter memory. She found the shade that suited her and claimed it, tail tucked around her paws. When strangers passed, she watched until their footsteps faded into harmless noise. The first thunderstorm tested the structure. Rain drummed the roof, Lightning flashed like the fire's ghost. Aurora froze once, then breathed, counting the distance between light and sound. Marisol stood in the corridor, not approaching, simply sharing the weather. The storm moved on. Fear did not stay. On the second evening, a shadow paused at the far walkway, still as stone. The air changed cedar, coffee, and something like worn leather. Aurora rose without thinking. The way muscle remembers a path, she went to the mesh and lifted on her hind legs. Eyes locked on the shadow that was not a stranger. Eli stepped forward and stopped 2 paces short, hands at his sides, letting scent go first. The world thinned to the diamond grid between them. Aurora pressed her forehead to the cold wire, claws sheathed. He lowered his brow to the same place. No words crossed. The silence carried what words would bruise. She trilled, a small broken note she had kept hidden since the fire. Eli's breath hitched, then steadied into the cadence she knew. Marisol eased back down the hall, giving them distance measured in mercy. Rain fell softer, like a hand smoothing the nap of fur the wrong way and then right again. Days found shape around that meeting. Training became ritual, not tricks. Touch the target stick, step onto the scale, ease into a crate and out again. Aurora learned the steps because trust was the path to less fear. Keepers learned her pauses, the places where patience held doors open. At dusk, the center glowed amber, all edges softened. Aurora patrolled once, then returned to the panel that faced the lane. Every sound was not him, until one was. She did not call. She stood very still, allowing the evening to carry his approach like a low river carrying light. When he came, she rose in the posture that had invented itself at the gate months ago. Paws spread, weight balanced, head tilted. Eli lifted his hands but didn't touch. Their breaths fogged the mesh in matching ovals, 2 warm signatures on a cold page. Habit had become a kind of vow. One night he did not come. The lane stayed empty, crickets sewing the dark back together. Aurora waited through the first hour, then the second, then lay by the fence with her face turned to the road. Morning found her there, calm but certain. She had learned his rhythm. She could bear a skipped beat. When he returned the next evening, he did not apologize out loud. He stood where he always stood and matched her stillness. Aurora rose and met him at the wire. No complaint in her body, only recognition. Waiting was not loss here. It was the bridge she walked each night, sure-footed, to meet what she chose. The center settled into late summer hush, sun slanting bronze across the yard. Aurora traced her perimeter with easy grace, whiskers testing air that smelled of hay, iodine, and distant pine. Each post, each shadow, belonged to her map. When the light bent warmer, she paused by the panel that faced the lane. Keepers worked in quiet pairs, their voices soft as glove leather. A target stick touched the mesh. Aurora bumped it once, then twice, accepting the clean click of reward. Routine was a language she could trust. Weigh, step, retreat, breathe. After, she returned to the fence, listening for the one sound that mattered. Eli's truck did not roar. It arrived like weather, first a faint vibration, then the dry whisper of gravel. Aurora lifted, weight balanced on the hips that fire had not broken. She stood tall, paws parted, head slightly tilted. It wasn't begging, it was recognition. A shape the body remembered before the mind. He stopped short of the mesh, always the same respectful distance. Hands open, shoulders loose. breath steady. Aurora caught cedar, coffee, and road dust, a scent line drawn straight to memory. She pressed her brow to the diamonds of wire. He matched it, letting silence carry what words would only bruise. They stood like that until dusk cooled the metal. Then she dropped lightly, circled once, and lay with her flank against the shade. Eli spoke of nothing fog on the river, a fox at dawn, a lens that wouldn't focus. She didn't parse nouns, she heard cadence, and cadence meant the world stayed kind. When he left, the lane restitched itself with crickets. Aurora remained by the panel, not sad, simply certain. Habit wasn't a cage. It was a bridge she chose to walk. She dozed with one ear turned outward, catching the small politics of night creatures and the soft heartbeat of the building. Morning brought school groups and paper wristbands. Marisol guided them past with whispering shoes. Wild, not tame, she murmured, a phrase like a posted sign. Aurora ignored the pointing hands, letting their awe pass over her like rain. Queens did not explain themselves to crowds. A sudden drone buzzed near the eaves, a mechanical wasp wobbling for a shot. Aurora's ears knifed back. She froze, then flowed to shadow, body long and low. A keeper snapped, "Down!" The drone retreated, shameful in its stutter. Aurora waited 5 slow breaths, then returned to the panel as if nothing had tried to steal her sky. Storms came in sheets that week, drumming tin and cedar. Lightning stitched the ridgeline. Thunder walked the halls. Aurora counted the beats from flash to sound, a math of weather that turned fear into fact. When Eli arrived, soaked, she rose anyway, rain peppering her whiskers like cold sparks. He laughed quietly, water ticking from his jacket. Aurora stood, pressed her forehead to wet wire, and trilled a small, fluted sound she gave to no one else. The rain swallowed it, but his breath changed. She felt the answer through steel. Some bridges needed no planks, only 2 steady shores. On a cool morning, Marisol opened the shift door and waited. Aurora chose to step through, practicing calm entry, calm return. Purpose was handed to her in small pieces: target, scale, scent bag, each a doorway she could open herself. At dusk, she brought that same steadiness back to the fence. One evening, the lane stayed empty, hours slipping pale and thin. Aurora did not pace. She simply sat with her chest high, eyes easing toward night. When he finally came, late and winded, he didn't apologize. He matched her posture, hands open to the quiet. She rose, and the ritual fit over them like light. By month's end, the trees began to bronze, evenings cooling early. Aurora learned the exact moment day loosens its grip. At that hinge of time, she took her place and waited, not for rescue, not for spectacle, but for the simple proof that trust could arrive again and again, right on time, like breath. Autumn thinned the light into copper threads, laying quiet over the yard. Aurora felt the season in her bones, a slowing that wasn't weakness, but wisdom. She made a final round of the perimeter, whiskers combing the breeze. The air tasted of dry needles, cold iron, and a promise that had learned patience. Marisol hung a small notice by the walkway. Evening demonstration, conservation fundraiser. Nothing flashy, just clean letters and time. Aurora watched it sway, uninterested in crowds but alert to rhythms. She measured the space, the exits, the angles of shade. Queens did not fret, they prepared. Eli arrived with a weathered case and a calm he wore like an old coat. His eyes found her first, the way they always did, as if checking the sky. He spoke with Marisol in the soft register of friends who shared duty. Aurora listened to cadence, not nouns, and heard no danger there, only care. Guests drifted in on quiet shoes, hushed by the weight of wire and wild. Aurora stayed visible, not performing, only complete in her own shape. Marisol's voice threaded through the dusk, wild, not tame, trust, not tricks. Aurora blinked slowly at that, as if the words had chosen her posture years ago. Rain hinted in the distance, a grey song edging the hills. When Eli stepped to the fence, he stopped the way he'd learned, 2 paces short, palms open. Aurora rose with him, a mirror cut from muscle and memory. Paws lifted, head tilted, claws asleep. Waiting was not a plea. It was a vow fulfilled. For a long beat the yard held its breath. Cameras stayed down. Someone had asked them to. Aurora pressed her brow to the mesh, and Eli matched the place, still cold on skin, warmth meeting warmth through pattern. No one spoke. Love, unadvertised, found its clearest form in restraint and steady breath. Then came the sound, the small fluted trill that belonged to him alone. It slipped from Aurora's throat like a ribbon and vanished into evening. Eli's breath changed, settling into the cadence she knew. Marisol stood back, eyes bright, hands quiet. The moment wrote its own caption without ink. Purpose followed ritual. Aurora touched the target, stepped to the scale, returned to center with elegance that turned instruction into choice. A keeper whispered, someone exhaled, and the fence felt less like a line and more like a vow. We meet here, where harm stops and trust begins again. Eli set the case on a stool and drew out a single print, not glossy, not loud matte as river stone. In it, Aurora stood in twilight, paws lifted, claws retracted, a crown of simple light on her ears. He held it to the crowd without speeches. The image said what language would only bruise. A breeze shook the cottonwoods. Aurora watched the print tilt and steady, then looked back to him. She placed one paw against the mesh, careful and sure, as if signing a document only they could read. Eli mirrored her hand, and the fence held both gestures, witness and boundary, in one clean shape. Night deepened. Crickets stitched the edges of silence, and the last guests drifted away, carrying a quieter kind of awe. Marisol dimmed the path lights. Eli stayed a beat longer, matching Aurora's stillness. She lowered to all fours, then sat, chest high, content to let the lane go dark on time. When he turned to leave, she did not call. She simply kept the panel, eyes easing shut, breath even. The vow did not require presence to remain true. Somewhere beyond the fence, a truck door closed, gentle as a page. Aurora settled, certain every night had taught her the same bright lesson. Love arrives, claws sheathed, right on time. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.